You grew up in the largest rebuilding period the country had ever known. Soldiers came home, suburbs went up, and normal life was being rebuilt from the ground up. The stability, you remember, was something the world was actively trying to create after everything had fallen apart. You remember order. You remember routines. You remember a world that felt structured, even if no one sat you down to explain why it worked that way. That sense of calm didn't appear by accident. It was built on purpose, brick by brick. But there was a rule underneath all of it. One nobody ever said out loud. You were taught something without being told. Keep it together, especially in public. Don't make a scene. Manage yourself. This wasn't cruelty. It was a culture trying to stay stable after the chaos of war and depression. The adults around you had lived through years when nothing was certain. They knew what happened when systems broke down. So they built routines, structure, rules that didn't need to be spoken out loud. And those rules weren't just enforced by your parents. You didn't grow up being watched by parents alone. The whole neighborhood carried responsibility for you. Any adult could correct you, and you accepted it without question. Your character was public. How you behaved at the corner store mattered as much as how you behaved at home. That gave you a spine. It gave you accountability that came from being part of something larger than yourself. But it also meant something else, something that would shape how you handled fear for the rest of your life. You practiced duck and cover. You crouched under a wooden desk that wouldn't have protected you from anything real, over and over. Then you went right back to class like nothing had happened. You learned how to keep going while danger existed in the background, not in front of you, just there, always there. And then that background danger became real. October 1962. This is the moment that defined your generation more than any other. The radio stayed on in every room. The adults got quiet in a way you'd never seen before. They watched the television like they were waiting for something terrible. This is where you learnt something lasting. Even adults can be afraid. And even when they're afraid, they don't fall apart. They keep the house running. They keep you fed. They keep going. That lesson shaped you more than most people realize. And here's what most people get wrong about your generation. The world wasn't done testing what you'd learned. You watched culture change in real time, faster than any generation before you. Elvis showed up and scandalized the country. Then the Beatles arrived and did it again. Each time, the world your parents built started to crack a little more. You learned early that change doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It just happens. And the skills you'd been taught to survive, they were about to become the very thing the next generation would reject. You saw the nation go quiet on black and white television when leaders were lost. You watched your parents cry in front of the screen. You watched strangers on the street stand completely still. You learned how fast stability can disappear, how quickly the ground under you can shift. And you learned not to fall apart in public. You learned that composure wasn't optional, it was respect, it was strength. So you became capable, reliable, steady. You learned how to carry things without complaining. You learned how to function even when the people around you were breaking inside. But there was a cost. You may not have learned how to explain what you felt while you felt it. You learned containment before you learned expression. Not emotional distance, emotional discipline. You might be doing it right now, reading this and thinking, yeah, but I'm fine. That's the discipline talking. And here's where the real misunderstanding begins, because the world changed. What used to be strength started looking like something else. In a world that expects constant sharing, constant processing, constant talking about feelings, that discipline can look like coldness. It can look like you don't care, but that's not what it is. If you handle things quietly, you're not lacking depth. You're carrying a skill that was necessary for survival, a skill that kept families together when everything else was falling apart. If someone from this era seems reserved, steadiness was how they were taught to show love. Reliability was the language of care. You didn't miss something. You adapted to the world you were given. Your children grew up differently. They came home to empty houses. They raised themselves in ways you never had to. You gave them discipline. They built something else instead. And neither generation has ever fully understood the other. The psychology of Generation X is on screen now. Different times teach different skills. You learned how to keep going when certainty wasn't promised. That understanding stays with you.